Amazing. So now we can get started. So today we're going to be talking about divine self-acceptance. We're going to be talking about the ego and how to create a more healthy relationship with our ego, and ultimately how we can come into a little bit more peace with ourself and with the resistances and the challenges that get brought up to us, pretty often. I don't think I would be alone in saying that the ego pops their voice up, relatively frequently. And so it's just about how we relate to that part of us. And I just want to do like a really beautiful reframe of how we work with the ego moving forward, and kind of that shadow, smaller side of ourself that is not really the element of the new earth woman. This is the one that kind of challenges us frequently. However, the relationship that we have between the two is ultimately where the new earth woman sits, the woman who can interact with her smaller self in just a completely different way to the way that maybe we've been taught to in the past, or the way that we do naturally, or the way that we've kind of learned over time about what that voice is and how we interact with it. So I wanted to start off with the story about, I was listening to a podcast recently of a man called Zach, can't think of his surname, but some of you may have interacted with some of his content over the last couple of months. He's been quite vocal about COVID and stuff. Anyway, it wasn't about COVID. It was about how he had worked in palliative care for quite some time. And he told this amazing story that just like landed so powerfully and beautifully when I heard it. And I thought I would share it with you today because I feel like it's really relevant to like the journey of kind of what we're here for, like to experience in life. And so he told this story how in palliative care there was this one particular day where they had like a few people pass away, which is, relatively normal in palliative care. But on this one particular day, 3 people who had died were actually revived and were, I guess, saved or brought back to life. So they had actually died in their bed or on their table or whatever, and they had been brought back to life. And he said that the really profound thing about this particular day and about this particular experience was that these 3 particular people had come like back onto the other side telling the exact same story. And they were sharing the exact same words about what they had experienced through the death. And every single one of them said that they were like enveloped with this sense of pure divine love and pure acceptance. The acceptance of who they were in this exact moment and how much of it was enough. And they said it was the most overwhelming sensation that they had ever experienced in their life. And to me, when I heard this, I was like, what an amazing gift. Like, what a gift to be able to experience that true sense of self, not just self-acceptance, but acceptance from God, from the universe, from everything and everyone around us. And it really got me kind of thinking and expanding on my ideas on what it is to have an ego and like what it is that stops us from feeling those feelings of true acceptance like on a daily basis. And ultimately what I came to the conclusion of, and what I really feel is the kind of path of the new earth woman, is to start to recognize that anything that, yes, it was Zach Bush, thanks Samantha. Yes, and Katie says, yes, I'm starting to tap into this frequency now, especially when in between sleep and waking. Yes, it's such an incredible frequency to experience. And I really want to share with you all today, like some of the ways in which I have found that place in myself, not all of the time, but it certainly has washed over me quite a few times, especially over the last year or so after having played with this particular kind of dynamic with this particular part of myself. And I really wanted to kind of express that when it comes to the ego, when it comes to the part of us sorry, my nose is very, very itchy. I don't know whether it was just that sip of my champagne or what has happened just in the last 30 seconds. So my apologies if I keep touching my nose. That our ego and our small self is actually one of the most truest and most divine gifts that we get in this experience. It wouldn't be a human experience if we didn't have that part of us. It wouldn't be all of these lessons and all of these experiences of divine joy and abundance and appreciation and love if we didn't have the polarity to see what all of that is not. And so ultimately the point of it being there and the point of our experience is to show us in all of the little spaces and all of the little places in which we are currently separate from, as in where we are telling ourselves the story in which we are separate from, because in truth, we are all one, we are all fragments of the prime creator of God, fragments of God experiencing itself for a unique experience. And with every moment that that small self or that ego kind of pops up into our experience, it's just to show us where there's another place that we can find that true divine love and acceptance, not only for self, but of other as well, because ultimately the reflection of how we feel about other is a really beautiful and true reflection on how we feel about ourselves. And we can only really love ourselves as much as we can love another, and we can only love another as much as we can love, we can only love ourselves as much as we can love another. I think I just said that in both ways, hope so. And so building this type of connection is really important to finding the true self-acceptance, not the self-acceptance, sorry, my computer screen is doing all kinds of things. Not the kind of acceptance where it's forced, but one where you actually feel it and you start to kind of cultivate it within your being more often than before. And that's where the kind of the nuances of the shifts are, is not necessarily that you feel that way all of the time, but how frequently you can recognize when that part of you is showing up and shift and shift and shift. And if it's, if it used to take you a week where you'd sit in a slump with that small self, really beating up on yourself, or it's part of your experience all the time, it's about how quickly we can move from that and recognize it as something that's just showing us and opening our eyes to another place that we can find more divine love and more divine self-acceptance for ourselves, and just see it for what it is. And instead of beating it up and trying to mindset over it or ignore it, we can actually find this beautiful kind of relationship with it, because it truly is going to be our biggest teacher in our lives. And so when it comes to these part of ourselves, you've probably heard the saying, what you resist persists. And this is absolutely the truth. When we resist that part of ourselves, when we try and ignore it or push it away or shut it down or shut it up, it's going to continue to persist. And unless we choose to face it and have a different experience with it, it's going to rule the show. It's going to run the life. It's going to kind of tell us what's what, as opposed to us having the experience of the higher experience, the one that we really truly desire. And without the ego, the life as a human would be really boring. Yeah, cool, it would be be very joyful and full of love, but if we didn't have the experiences of the opposite, how would we know, or how would we get to play with the higher experiences if we didn't get to see what the lower is? Yes, resistance is feeding the energy, exactly. And so, we get to check in often, which side are we giving our energy to? When we're resisting, we think we're looking the other way and not giving our energy to it. But the truth is, the resistance is a frequency in and of itself. And so the kind of challenge is, how can we find more love for that part of ourselves? Because when we come into right relationship with it is when the resistance falls away and we start to listen to it as a messenger instead of something that's wrong with us or something that is bad. And so we start to get to look at it with curiosity and with compassion. And we start to ask questions, and with loving inquiry, communicate with it to see, okay, cool, what's this blind spot? What is this part of me that I'm not being able to love in this moment? Now, this can happen in like a multitude of different experiences, a multitude of different examples. For me, it's like when the little voice comes up that says, you know, it was a fluke when I do something really amazing. Or, oh, everybody else knows that. You don't have anything special to offer. Or, oh, when you run your immersion next week, it's going to be crap. Nobody's going to like it, right? All of these parts. And it's like, okay, cool. I can either sit there and beat that part of me up and be annoyed at it or ignore it, or I can come face to face with it and hear it, interact with it, and ultimately shower it with love and kind of be in communion with it. And again, finding that kind of right relationship, that experience that is a little bit less resistant, a little bit less friction, and just a little bit more flow. And so we've got to start to kind of listen carefully to the nuances, because in the old earth, the ego was completely running the show. You can see it in the way that our society looks. Everything is run by the ego. We're hungry for power, we're hungry for money, we're hungry for status, we're hungry for fancy cars and experiences to show how good we are, instead of the heart space, which just knows that it's true. And in the old earth, the ego, like I was mentioning yesterday, would push you to take the actions that you want to take. And so instead of being pulled by the soul. And so it's about creating this kind of relationship between the ego and the soul, where we can find a little bit more surrender and a little bit more love for the ego, so that there is less resistance and so that we can evolve and grow. Yes, Samantha says, I lean into it and let it speak to me. Exactly. And Jules says, good morning, happy birthday. Hey, Jules, thanks for being here. And so, feeling into the parts in which we get to love more. Now, there's a lot of talk in the kind of spiritual community about and it started in personal development massively about overcoming the ego and the death of the ego and all these things. And I have a bit of a different relationship with it. At least I have built over time. And that is that when I talk about ego deaths, it's more of the beauty of the death as opposed to wanting to beat it and break it down. Because when the ego is running the show, it's kind of like this film of grease that is over top of everything, as opposed to it being in its pure clarity. It kind of puts a filter over everything that we see and everything that we do. And it's kind of wiping the film away and getting more clarity. Thanks, Christine. Thank you. So in order to wipe that clean and to face it is to meet her, to face her, to allow her to be expressed. Because what we're taught from a really young age is that this kind of egoic part of us is to not be expressed, and it's bad and it's wrong. But the more that we can find love for it, the easier the relationship is. The more we get to kind of come together in unity with that part of us, because we start to recognize that all it is a part of us that requires more love and requires more of our attention to shower it with more of our love. And so, at least in my experiences, the way in which that kind of niggly voice kind of subsides or dissolves or fades away is only when I'm willing to have that conversation with it, when I'm willing to look it in the eyes and say, what is going on? Like, I will hear you. I will bear witness to you. I will see you for all that you are, with love, with compassion, with curiosity. And so one of the practices I encourage you to do if you're ever having a day where the ego is kind of running the show and really telling you all the stories is to sit in front of the mirror, come face to face with her, allow her to speak. And this can be a really gritty process, because if you truly allow her to speak, some pretty gnarly stuff can come out sometimes. I've done this process where I have come into that face-to-face experience and so much ickiness has come up. But on the other side of it, I feel completely free. Because if we're not resisting it and we're not challenging it and we're just allowing and surrendering a little bit, it has no power over us. It can't run the show anymore. And when we're pushing it away, it's like ignoring the little child in us that needs some more attention. Like, you imagine if you had a little child and it was having a tantrum and you're just like, oh, I'm just going to like lock you in the cupboard and not deal with you because it's a little bit too hard right now. Like, this is never going to create a healthy dynamic between you and that child. And so when we face it and we come eye contact and we find that place of listening, just like we would a best friend when they're having a bad day, we hold space for it. We allow it to be expressed. We don't judge it for what it's saying. We can see it in what it's in right now, and we hold the higher version for it. We hold the higher expression. We share it with love, allow it to say what it needs to say, and then from that place is where the rebirth gets to happen. The death of the ego in a beautiful and healthy way can only happen when we surrender the story, when we lay it out and go, okay, cool, there's this stuff that isn't serving me. What is it? Without the awareness of the story, without recognizing what it is, it's really challenging to have that dynamic. It's like with your loved ones, when there's something really wrong and they won't tell you what the problem is. How are you meant to kind of be able to support them through it if you have no idea what it is? Especially if they're telling you there's something wrong with what you've done. And so, letting her speak. I would love to hear from you guys. Like, how often have you come into communication with that part of yourself in a loving way? Or is it always, and has it always been, in the way where we are shutting it down or being kind of fighting fire with fire, trying to tell it to shut up instead of kind of listening? And I'm curious, like, how would it feel to you if when you needed to express yourself, when you needed to share how you were feeling, the people around you were just like, oh, that's not valid. That's not a good thing to think. Like, just change your mind, just change your mind. We have to be able to find that allowance, because the resistance is what gives the small self, the ego part of us, the power over us. There is nothing else that gives it the power other than us giving it the power by not allowing it to speak, by having a hold over us. So I'm just waiting to see if some comments come through. I know there's a delay, so I'll just keep going for now. Oh, here we go. Katie says, it's something that I've learned and embraced in the last few years. I used to fight it hard. This way is much more divine. It is. And like I said earlier, it can be a little bit gritty, a lot gritty sometimes. But on the other side of the grittiness is where it's like the heavens open and the light shines through and you're like, not only is life good again, but it's better than it was before. Julie says, I've mostly come from a place of judgment in the past. Exactly. I was just about to go into judgment. So thank you for bringing that to the table, Julie, because the judgment place is where we get to see these more parts of this separation of the dynamic that is telling us that we are not of God, that we are not fragments of God, that we are something other, that we are not enough, that we are not good enough, etc., that we are not worthy. And so in all of the times we place judgment over that small self, it's a projection of self. And if self is God, then you're rejecting God. And when I use language of God, if that doesn't resonate with you, or if that isn't your wording, that's perfectly okay. Just replace it with whatever word suits you. It might be source, prime creator, whatever it is that feels good for you. Use whatever language. God is just what resonates for me the deepest, without any links to religion, completely separate from religion. So just, it's a purity of the word. So a really beautiful place in which we can start to recognize where this egoic or small self part of us is when we're looking at other people. Because sometimes it's challenging to recognize in ourselves because it's such an embedded, habitual part of the conversation that's going on in our experience all of the time. And so we can start to look outside of us for the perspective so that we can see what might be going on internally. Christine says, I write down what has been hidden deep. I then go for a walk on the beach and get my feet in the water, and it helps to wash it away. In the past, I've been harshly judged by others, especially family, and I had taken it on. I now have big boundaries and feel loads safer. Yeah, I love this. And so when we are seeing other and we're making judgments of other, or when we're super acutely aware of the judgments that others are making of us, it's a really perfect example for us to look into. Okay, cool. When I'm looking at Sally over there and I'm saying that she should be doing X, Y, Z, or she's not doing this good enough, or oh my God, look at her dress, or whatever it is, it's about bringing that finger that you're pointing outside of yourself, bringing 2, 3 back in, pointing it back to self and going, cool, I can see that part of me looking at that person and projecting that judgment onto them. How am I putting this judgment onto myself? In what ways am I judging myself? And then having the conversation with that small part, with that egoic part, and say, cool, what is it about that particular thing that I see in somebody else that I am judging in myself? Recognizing it, coming into relationship with it, expressing love for it, saying, okay, cool. Thank you so much, ego or small self, whatever you want to call it. Thank you so much for showing me where there's this piece of separation, where there's this piece that is telling me that I am separate from God. Because in every experience that we have where we are placing shame and judgment onto others, it's simply a reflection of what we're placing onto ourselves, because other is self. And self is other. It's simply there to show us the experiences that are going on internally. And so when we use the world as our mirror, we can see what it is that's happening internally. And we start to be able to, when we find that love for self, we can love other more. And when we find that love for other, we can love ourselves more. And when we start to inquire in these little pieces that are kind of in our fields and clear them away, we open up and crack open to a more beautiful experience with life itself, with ourselves, with everything around us. And so I wanted to leave you with a practice today that I would love you to take away and do in your own time. Now, this practice initially came through to me when there was something kind of major going on for me, and it was probably one of the most powerful experiences that I've had to date. And I wanted to share it with you because it was a pure cleansing and a coming into that feeling that I was talking about in the start of this, when I was talking about the people that have the had the death experience and experienced that true self-acceptance. And so, like I said, in your own time, maybe you're like curled up in bed in like the fetal position and really hugging and loving yourself. I want you to just like close your eyes and imagine that you are kind of hanging mid-air in the ether, in space, in kind of darkness. And I want you to imagine that you are being cradled, like your body is cradled in the hands of God. Now again, replace God with whatever word suits you. And just visualize yourself floating around, being held completely, where all of your worries and frustrations and judgments just fall away. And imagine that you are being completely bathed in light, white light, purified, cleansed of all of the judgments of self, of all of the judgments of other, and feel the experience of that true self-acceptance, the acceptance that God is giving you, that you can receive from God, and recognize that God is giving that to itself because you are that, and it is you. And bathe yourself with the experience of deep, deep self-acceptance. And in every day and every experience moving forward, when you start to create that relationship with that ego part of yourself, continue to come back to being held. So Christine says, I do this by being held by my ancestors as well. Perfect. The one thing I would just be mindful of that is just that one piece that I mentioned a couple of days ago, which is that all of the other spiritual beings that are not in physical form are still like us. They still have some of the pieces of experiences and karmas and all those things. And so if you can come to whatever your version of the true source is, that will give you a slightly different experience, because your ancestors always are holding you and supporting you in every experience that you have through their experiences, through sharing and showering divine love on you. And this to me is like just a slightly different version of that. And so that is the kind of pieces of the small self and the self-acceptance that I wanted to share with you today. Going into the ego is kind of a daily experience and a daily practice. It is something that we really cover in a really special way, in a really sacred space of sisterhood in the Wise Warrior Woman container, in the sacred immersion. And if doing some of this work, some of this recognition of the shadow self, recognition of the small self, and coming into right relationship to make your experience that little bit more fluid and flowy and filled with a little bit more love and less judgment, then that will be one way that if you want to go into it deeper and be held and supported by somebody that truly does see the highest in you, that's a way that we can kind of work together. And so if you feel called to find out more, then you are more than welcome to drop me a message. A couple of you already have, and so I see you. And yeah, that's all that we have for today. So Christine says, I always go up through the creative first and then come down through the fourth plane where they are. Amazing. That's perfect. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. So I would love to hear from you. What was your biggest takeaway from today? What is something that you recognized around yourself, around the way that you've been interacting with this part of yourself? What have you noticed through what I've shared today, and maybe where you can shine a little bit more love onto that part of you that is maybe being a little bit hard on yourself or on others? I would love to hear from you. And I'm going to cheers you all again. For those of you who missed, cheers! Who missed earlier, that I have a glass of champagne to celebrate my birthday. And I also have my cup of tea because it is 10:30 in the morning. I was gonna like decorate all of this and like make it very birthday, but instead I just wore my party dress and I didn't have any decorations to decorate the back. So this is all you get, but you do get my party earrings. So for those of you who missed the start, these are my beautiful birthday earrings that arrived in the mail from my beautiful soul sisters. Shouting out to you again. I love you so much. And so just seeing if there's any more comments coming through. Cheers! Yay! Cheers, Katie. Have an amazing day. Thank you. I will. Approaching all of me with kindness and embracing all of me, even the messy bits. Yes, Samantha, I love that. I love that. This is the most important thing, because self-acceptance, true self-acceptance, can only come when we can see those messy parts and love them just as much as what we love the parts of us that challenge us. And same goes with those that we love. When we can love the parts of them that annoy us as much as we love the parts of them that we love, that's when we come into that true acceptance and true love and true divine experience with self and with other. Okay, that's all for today. If your comments come through later, I will reply. If you caught us on replay, I'd love to hear what you thought. And I am sending you all so much love, and thank you all for the birthday love, and mwah, I'll catch you all tomorrow.